With the Lakers winning championship 17 at the conclusion of the postseason, it's now time for us to compare both Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics. Who is the greatest franchise in NBA history? But before we get started, this is your boy David from NBA Knowledge, and if you enjoy what you see from this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well as push that bell for post notifications. But without further ado, let's discuss the Lakers versus the Celtics. Who is the GOAT franchise? In my opinion, I'm just going to come out straightforward and say, I believe the Lakers are by far the greatest franchise in the history of basketball, and one could argue in the history of sports. Well, when you look at the Celtics, let me explain why they are not. A lot of their championships came from an era that was relatively weak, because if I'm not mistaken, the Lakers have far more championships in the modern era of basketball. Yes, you do have all-time greats such as Bill Russell, Paycheck, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale. The list goes on and on of great Hall of Fame players that played for the Boston Celtics organization, but you can't just overlook the fact that a lot of their championships came in one of the weakest eras in NBA history. Don't get me wrong, I'm never going to take credit from Bill Russell. Guys like him and Havlicek as well as Wilt Chamberlain, yeah, they are very disrespected about their era. But you can't just overlook things like the lack of a three-point line or the lack of a lot of rules changes that have happened in today's game in later eras such as the modern era. And when you look at the Lakers, look at everything past the 60s and 70s. They won with Magic's era. They won alongside Kobe and Shaq. They carried that on to now with LeBron James. When you look at the Boston Celtics, after the Larry Bird era, they didn't do anything. And that's why the 08 championship meant so much, because after years of doing nothing and being a premier franchise in the NBA, for them to finally reach those heights again, it was a huge deal. But when you look at the Lakers, they've been dominant since the beginning of their existence. You can even go back to the days when they were the Minneapolis Lakers with George Mikan, later carrying that on with Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain along with Elgin Baylor. Then they also transitioned into the phase of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, picking him up from the Milwaukee Bucks, and then later on drafting Magic Johnson. And even when Kareem retired, they were still able to get to the finals and lose obviously in 6 games to the Bulls, but it was still an accomplishment nonetheless. But when you look at both the Lakers and Celtics, they were dominant in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But a lot of people forget that after that, both organizations kind of floundered for a while, but who was able to pick themselves back up first? It was the Lakers, getting Shaquille O'Neal after the Orlando Magic fumbled one of the biggest bags in NBA history. They then proceeded to draft Kobe Bryant, and the rest was history. They three-peated from 2000 to 2002 and even made another finals in 2004. And sure, many people still speculate about how good they could have been if they stuck together, but I think those questions really don't matter, because we're comparing them to the Celtics. And what did the Celtics do from that Bird era up until 2008? Absolutely nothing. They didn't do a single thing. And sure, a lot of people are going to be saying the Lakers have an advantage because they're in LA, but I think people need to understand that yes, being in a big market can give you some advantages over smaller markets, but it's not like the Lakers have been incompetent and stars just go there because it's LA. No, that's not true. They make right decisions. Drafting Kobe Bryant was a smart decision. Drafting Magic Johnson, despite it being obvious, was a smart decision. Getting Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the trade market, a smart decision. Hell, even though Dwight Howard, Steve Nash, Ron Artest with Kobe, it was a failed super team alongside Pau Gasol as well. It was a failure, but it was still a move that they were willing to make. They've been willing to make moves time after time after time, and meanwhile, when you look at the Boston Celtics, especially over the last 5 years, it's very obvious that Danny Ainge, he can be very hesitant on pulling the triggers, whether it's on trades for guys like Anthony Davis or Paul George, as well as Jimmy Butler, or hell, they can be hesitant on just signing random free agents. They are very, very cautious with how they handle their roster, and they've paid the price by only having 1 championship since the Larry Bird era. So as far as I am concerned, the Boston Celtics have a rich history. They have 17 championships, and I will never take that away from them, despite a lot of those rings coming from a weak era. But when you look at the modern era of basketball and how the Lakers have dominated so much of this era, yeah, sure, the titles may be equal in quantity, but they are not equal in quality. And that's why I believe the Los Angeles Lakers are perhaps the greatest team in the history of sports and are indeed the greatest team in the history of basketball. Sorry to all the Celtics fans, but the truth is the truth, and you can't run from it anymore. But that concludes this video, you guys. Let me know your opinions down below in the comment section, as well as hit that subscribe button and push the bell for post notifications. And if you disagree with anything that I said, let me know in the comment section down below. Y'all stay safe and have a great day. This is your boy David from NBA Knowledge signing out. Peace.